So I'm delighted now to be joined by Deborah Meaden, who will need no introduction for you as such a wonderful leading businesswoman and of course one of the famous Dragon Dens. Deborah, you've been here at COP26 these last few days. What have you made of it?
I feel very honoured to be here because it's discussing the most important topic of our lifetime. And I've heard a lot of really, really good stuff. I guess the question is, what actually happens next? Because there's some great initiatives, there's some wonderful pledges being made, but we don't have an awful lot of time, so we shouldn't really be talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You know, by the end of next year, I'd like to see that some of this has already hit home.
As a businesswoman, of course, perhaps one of the most famous businesswomen in the UK, interesting to get your thoughts on what George Eustice has said this morning as Secretary of State for the Environment on the Andrew Marr programme, when he was pushed about how to make some of these commitments made at COP stick, and particularly around trade deals, and do we need to bring in trade tariffs to try to make these stick? What's your thought on that?
Well, that's one of the hardest and one of the easiest ways to show that actually what we're talking about here at COP is real and is actually going to happen, because actually immediately making a statement to embed some of these pledges and some of these promises that have been made into trade deals means that it starts happening now. So that's difficult. Trade deals are never easy anyway, but they aren't easy. But that doesn't mean to say that we should stop making the changes that we need to make.
So we should make sure that all the promises that are being made here this week are absolutely hardwired into all future trade deals and perhaps even retrospectively into old ones.
Absolutely, and that will be the clearest indicator that this COP, that COP26, is different to the others.
And more generally, what do you think business needs to sort of keep pushing forward on this? Some parts of the business community really seem to get it and driving forward on it. Other parts don't so much, of course. What do you think are the signals that are needed, the real pushes that are needed to enable business to move further and faster on this agenda?
There's two ends of it. I actually am more hopeful than ever because the consumer is wiser than ever. The consumer cares, and what the consumer wants, ultimately business needs to deliver. So the consumer is driving from one side, and actually a framework from the government so that the business knows a framework within which it needs to work. What do we invest in for the future? Is it hydrogen? What is going to be supported into the future? So it's got to listen at both ends. It's got to listen to its consumer, and the consumer is never been more alive to the problems that this planet is facing than it is now. And any business that ignores that doesn't know it yet, but they're in trouble.
So that's what business can do. What about people taking to the streets? Yesterday we saw 150,000 people on the streets of Glasgow pushing for more action on climate and nature. Also at hundreds of cities across the UK and across the world, people coming out, and particularly this extraordinary momentum from young people right around the world. How does that make you feel?
It's fantastic. It makes you feel like you're not alone, because sometimes you walk around in your everyday life and you kind of feel like, I know there's lots of people out there, but they've not all come together. But when you see that number of people engaged on the streets, it's motivating and it's inspiring. But what I say is it can't just happen this week. We need to keep that pressure on. We need to keep showing, not just going back to our own homes and thinking, we need to keep showing that this issue is not going away and it has got to be dealt with in a full way now.
And finally, we've got 870,000 supporters of the wildlife trusts across the UK and in the Isle of Man and Alderney. What would you like to say to them?
I would like to say that you are supporting probably the most important thing we can do in the UK. We need to live alongside we need to learn to live alongside our wildlife, and you offer us a framework to do that.
Deborah Meaden, thanks so much for speaking to the Wildlife Trust here at COP26. Thank you.